Thank you. We're trying to do something a little different tonight as far as broadcasting to Facebook and YouTube on our Greater Harvest channel. I'm not sure if that's going to work, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start out with a prayer by Lane Dennis, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers to you today. Lane.
Dear Heavenly Father, we'd like to thank you for blessing us to come together this evening, Father God, for Life Class. We'd like to ask you to bless us through this evening. Bless our minds, Father God, and touch our hearts. Bless us to get something out of this that may help us moving forward, Father God, to help us enrich our lives, Father God. We thank you for everything that you've done for us and everything that you continue to do for us. We ask you to watch over us through this evening and bless us on tonight, Father God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen and thank God.
Amen. Thank you so much for that beautiful prayer. And so now we're going to start. I want to introduce to you, and if you will, Tara, you will take spotlight the presenters for me as I introduce them. I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker. Tonight's session is human trafficking, its implications, and how you can help. And our first presenter is going to be Yolanda Jones, MPA, that's Masters of Public Administration. Yolanda Jones was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. She currently serves as Vice President and Chief Operations Officer, COO of AIDS Services of Dallas. While not working with those living with HIV and AIDS, her passion is freeing and advocating for youth impacted by sex trafficking. As a result, she serves as a volunteer, mentor, and board member for Traffic 911, a Texas-based nonprofit organization that exists to free American youth from sex trafficking through prevention, identification, and empowerment. A proud graduate of Texas Southern University, she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Intercultural Communications and a Master of Public Administration with an emphasis in public policy at the Barbara Jordan Mikey, I think that's right, Leland School of Public Affairs. Yolanda is a lifetime member of Texas Southern University National Alumni Association and immediate past president of the Dallas Alumni Chapter. Additionally, she serves as the Program Planning and Development Chair for the Texas-New Mexico Southwest region and locally on the Arts and Letters Committee of the PP&D Committee for Southwest Dallas County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And our second speaker for tonight, because I don't want to stop the flow when Dr. Jordan comes in. So if you highlight Dr. Jordan, Natasha Jordan, MD, MBA, is a graduate of the Psychiatry Residency Program at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Jordan is passionate about serving patients with mental health illnesses in the U.S. and the Caribbean. Dr. Jordan aims to highlight the important intersection of faith and mental health. She is frequently featured at national and international academic conferences, Christian conferences, international news and radio, and more. She studies mental health first aid as an evidence-based psychoeducation intervention for Black church attendees in Philadelphia. Dr. Jordan recently founded the 501c3 nonprofit Christian Mental Health Initiative to help churches address the mental health needs of their congregants. Starting fall 2023, Dr. Jordan will be an assistant professor of psychiatry at Cooper University Healthcare in Camden, New Jersey. She will split her time between clinical psychiatry, medical school student teaching, and community-based participatory research in faith-based communities. Please use your reactions and let's please welcome both of these ladies that are going to provide us with the information this evening. Thank you so much. And so I'm going to turn it over to Yolanda Jones.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me out. As she mentioned, I am Yolanda Jones. One new correction to my bio, effective April 1st, I will be the new CEO of an organization called AIN. So I'm super excited about that new position. I will be the first Black female to lead an organization in 37 years. They've never had any person of color in leadership. So I'm super excited. And it's another agency that focuses on people living with HIV and AIDS. And so I'm super excited to start that on the 1st. But as my bio also mentioned, I have been a volunteer since 2016 with Traffic 911. Please look us up, www.traffic911.com. I started in 2016 when the organization was relatively small. And at that time, I got involved because at the time I was working at UT Southwestern medical school, and I was a program director of a program for HIV positive youth, 13 to 24, and then also HIV positive women who were pregnant. And so I was the grant administrator of that program, and I started to look at data. I started to see an increase of girls testing positive for HIV between the ages of 13 to 17, and I just was confused about why this spike in our numbers. After doing further investigation and talking to some of our clinics, I come to find out some of these girls were classified as prostitutes. How can she be a prostitute? She's 14. There's no such thing as a 14-year-old prostitute. And so I started to dig a little deeper. And once I started to dig a little deeper, I did what people normally do when they get interested. They Googled. So I Googled sex trafficking in Dallas. I knew what trafficking was to a certain extent based on movies. Based on people being kidnapped from Colombia and white vans driving by and snatching girls. That was my thought process when it came to human trafficking or sex trafficking. And so after further review of Googling organizations, I found Traffic 911, which is a Christian-based organization. And I called and said, what is it that you do? Is that an issue here in Dallas? For how long? Where do you get these girls from? So I was so intrigued. And they was like, well, we have a volunteer session coming up. You should come. And I went, and I've been there ever since. And this year is my first year serving as an official board member of this organization. And so that's how I got in this. So let's kind of go back to what is sex trafficking, right? What is human trafficking? Is there a difference? Is there different forms of human trafficking? And how do we classify trafficking, and what is the issue in Dallas? Is there an issue in Dallas? I like to start off by trade. I'm into data all day, every day. But when I'm talking to folks who are not, I like to talk about real life scenarios. One of the first girls that I encountered as I became a volunteer with Traffic 911, we used to go into Wade Juvenile Detention Center, and we would do a presentation called TRAPS. TRAPS was a presentation where we explained to teenage girls exactly what sex trafficking was. If the girl felt comfortable enough, eventually we would go in every single Tuesday, every week. She would tell us her experience and how she ended up in juvenile. Most of those girls were not in there for sex trafficking or prostitution. They were in there for something else, but it was because of their pimp or boyfriend pimp, which I'll get into later, that got them there in the juvenile detention center. So one young lady who was at the time attending Hutch High School, Wilmer Hutchinson High School. And at the time, she was living with her grandmother with a 2-bedroom house with 7 other people in the house. She was the oldest of the kids that were in the home, and so she was used as a babysitter all the time. She was not as trendy or up to date as some of the other girls in school, so she had a hard time finding friends. She would skip school because she felt like she was being bullied, or she just didn't feel comfortable at school. So she would skip school at the West End. I know everybody's familiar with the West End, so she would kind of hang out there all day. She met a young man who was selling water. And when I say young man, again, she was 14, he was 34. He was selling water, and they ended up talking. She ended up running with him, spending the whole day with him. They would ride on the train and just talk all day and night. And she said he was the first person to actually listen to her. He was the first person to not ignore her. He was the first person to ask her what she thought about certain things, which was something she felt she wasn't getting from home. She was raised by her grandmother, who worked a full-time job and was never there. And so she felt like this was the first person who ever paid her any attention. Long story short, eventually He convinced her after they had sex for the first time. He invited two of his friends into the room. He was also homeless, so they would stay in abandoned apartments. They would sleep at parks. And at this time, she was a runaway, but not really a runaway. And so some of you know, when children run away and are not kidnapped or there's no evidence of they've been forced, there is no Amber Alert. So what does that mean? Nobody's looking for her, right? And that's the story of so many of our girls. Nobody is looking for them. And so she would do 3 days with him, go back home. You know, she would kind of go back and forth. Eventually, he made her stay, and he started to sell her to multiple men. Either he had her walking the streets because, again, he was homeless, so he didn't have, you know, some people have a little bit more technology where they are on back pages and setting up things in a hotel. Because he was also homeless himself, that was not his setup. And so he forced her with violence. He told her if she ever ran away, I will go back and get your little sister. I know exactly what school she goes to. She will come and work for me. And he basically terrorized her. And this went on for at least 8 months. Every time she tried to run away, he would come back. He would find her and make her come back. She was at this time afraid to tell her grandmother or her siblings because he said he would kill everybody in the family. Again, a lot of time these traffickers use fear as a tactic to control their victims. And so he used that fear of, if you tell anybody, I'm going to kill your whole family. I'm going to make your sister come work for me if you leave. Luckily, he got caught with drugs and was arrested. When he got arrested, it was her opportunity to run away. So she hopped on a train. Of course, she didn't have any money, so she hopped on a train, headed back to her grandmother's house. When she hopped on the train, a DART officer asked for her pass. When she said she didn't have it, he grabbed her and by the arm and got her off of the train, off of the rail. When she snatched away from him and she pushed him and he fell, so she was charged with assault. No one ever asked, where are you coming from in the middle of the day, 14-year-old little girl? No one asked, are you okay? What happened to you? They sent her to jail for the physical assault on the officer that she pushed down. She also fainted. She had a panic attack and she fainted doing all of this. So they took her to Parkland. There she was diagnosed with, she had gonorrhea, chlamydia, herpes, and one more. So she had multiple STIs that were not treated. And so they treated her for that, but they still took her to Wade Juvenile Detention Center. And of course, still out of fear, she never said anything. She never said, I'm escaping a guy who made me, when she called her boyfriend, I'm escaping someone who made me sex trafficked me. She never said any of that. She just went to jail and she kept her mouth shut. And after going into the juvenile detention center, it took her at least 2 months to say, like, oh, that happened to me. I didn't know that's what it was called. And so Traffic 911 has an amazing team and network of individuals. We have our own law officer that we call when we have any girls that we need to rescue. They did a rape report, even though this was an old crime. They looked at her old medical records and they found out the guy's real name. So of course she didn't even know his real name. So luckily he was still in jail. So we were able to prosecute and go to trial for him. Unfortunately, that trial date kept getting reset because every time she would see him in court, she would either scream or have an outburst or have another panic attack. His lawyer would always say, this is biased to the jury, and ask for a mistrial. So what happens while we're going back and forth? Unfortunately, she's still in the Wade, not today, but at the time, she's still at Wade Juvenile Detention Center. Because that's not why you were in there. You were in there because you pushed an officer. We're trying to get down to the reason of why you did push the officer, but until we figure that out, you still have to go back to Wade Juvenile Detention Center. And so I like to start with that story, and I'll bring you up to the current date, 2024. And this was in 2018, this story, when this happened. And I like to start when we talk about sex trafficking, I like to start that way so you can understand that it's not always a white man, a guy in a mask, and a kidnapping. Sometimes it is individuals who trick these girls into doing something that they don't want to do. And then the girls not feeling like they have an opportunity to get out. So that's for us at Traffic 911, we focus on girls. And I say girls, that means anybody under the age of 18. Because once you are 21, it's a little harder to prove that you were sex trafficked and that you didn't agree to prostitution. So that's why we kind of focus on the younger generation. There are different types of trafficking, such as labor trafficking, drug trafficking, and sex trafficking. According to the Rights of Black Girls, children account for 57% of all juvenile prostitution arrests. Again, 57% of all juvenile prostitution arrests. That's a lot. And these are all Black and brown girls. Again, I'm 14. How am I a prostitute? How? How did that happen? Right? So again, and I want to talk about voting too, right? This is why knowing propositions, knowing what's happening in your city, knowing what these politicians are contesting, this is why it's important, because a 12-year-old should not be prosecuted for prostitution, right? But right now, that's the law. So the average age of entry is 12 through 16. So when you see someone who has been in the life, as we call it, long term, most likely they were been in the life since they were in their teenage years and have not found a way to escape. Different types of, so that you have prostitution as a form of sex trafficking. You have stripping. So some people don't know that I may not put you on the street or force you to have sex with anybody, but I'm making you dance as a stripper. And I take all of your money. That's also a form of sex trafficking as well. Also pornography as well. And then escort services. Those are all classified as sex trafficking rates. And again, this sex trafficking is really defined as anything where you are being forced or coerced to participate in these acts. And so that's how we define sex trafficking. 1 out of 3 teens who run away are at high risk of being approached within 48 hours. So what does that mean? That means within 48 hours, teens who run away, men and women, let me not just say men and women who seek out these young ladies and young men, they pay attention to where they are. So for example, Dallas Greyhound, that is a spot where a lot of runaways can jump on a bus from another city, relatively cheap, come to Dallas, and they walk from that Greyhound to the McDonald's. That's another site where a lot of men stand around and look for little girls with backpacks on, or those who look lost or look like they don't know where they are, and they approach them. Hey, you hungry? Let me take you to McDonald's. They have free Wi-Fi. Hey, let me do this for you. You should go charge your phone. Hey, are you new? I can show you where to go. I can show you where a shelter is. And they'll do things like, hey, I got kids too. Let me show you my kids. I'm safe. I just want to help you out. I want somebody to help my daughter out. So again, everything is not always used with force. We have different types of pimps. We have the boyfriend pimp, which is the one who plays as if we are romantically involved and you're doing this for me because we're a couple and we need money to survive. But I love you. That's why I'm doing it. I love you and you love me. And so let's work together to get money because you're my Bonnie and I'm your Clyde, the whole scenario. Then you have guerrilla pimps. Guerrilla pimps are those who start with violence from the beginning. There is no Mr. Nice Guy. It is from the beginning. They start out extremely violent and aggressive towards these women and girls. And then you have the relational pimp, which means the uncle or the dad or brother or cousin of a family friend, right? I'm at my friend's house, which is the reason why my grandmother never let me go to sleepovers, because I don't know who at the house. She used to say, now that I'm older, I completely understand, but I used to be so annoyed when I was little. She would say, we don't know who uncle's crawling on the floor. And I'd be like, she don't even have no uncles. What are you talking about? But now I understand the importance of, we don't know who's at these people's house. And they may be the perfect gentleman to their niece and nephew, but to a friend of a friend, that's a totally different story. So they have their own category, right? Because they're relational pimps. My niece's best friend, I'm gonna take care of you, I take care of her. And so they use that same tactics to coerce young women and young men. And so we recently had to expand our service to include little boys as well. And with the boys, it's a lot harder because they don't want to tell anybody because, again, masculinity. I don't want to tell anybody that's happened to me. But we're starting to get more and more calls for boys. So let me also kind of go back. Originally, Traffic 911, like I said, we were going to the Juvenile Detention Center, and that's where we would get all of the girls in our program. Now, since then, they have a grant, and now we went from an organization that had 4 paid employees to an organization with over 25 employees that are all bachelor or master level social workers. And their work includes, we'll get a call from police or Homeland Security or the FBI to say that we have a young girl who was just rescued. The job of Traffic 911 is to go to that hotel, that police station, wherever they may be. They bring a backpack. That backpack includes journals, it includes a teddy bear and lotions. Also, we pick up food for the girls. We ask them, hey, what do you want to eat? And we call it the long haul love, right? So there's not a bunch of paperwork you start to fill out. We just start to get to know the young ladies. What's going on? Where are you? What do you need? How did you get here? And we just start to build that relationship. Through the program, we have counselors, of course, and you have advocates. Traffic 911 has also extended to provide counseling services for the family. Because how do you deal now with a 14-year-old girl who has had 8 months that most adult women have never experienced? How do you continue to love and mother and speak to this child who has saw the world in such a wicked way? So we now extend our services to the parents and guardians as well. We have highs and lows in the program. We have girls who have returned back to school after being out of school for at least 2 to 3 years. We have girls working on GEDs. We have girls who are we have baby showers for our girls in case they are pregnant, and some of them may have been pregnant and unsure who the father is due to their life while they were in that life. But we try to bring joy to that pregnancy anyway throughout the darkness of it. We work really hard to, we have a April 13th, no, April 12th, I'm sorry, Friday, April 12th is our prayer breakfast that we have every year. Again, go to our website to check that out. It's our only fundraiser that we have as an organization. And every dollar is given right back to the organization to provide the services that the other organizations that our federal grants don't cover. So some of the things we do for the girls are not covered by a grant. So we rely heavily on donors and donations from the community. But it's the morning of prayer breakfast on April 13th, which is a Friday at the Dallas Arboretum. So again, for that. What else can I say? Any questions? I know we're going to do questions at the end, but I want to make sure if I don't forget anything or something somebody may have. I guess you can either put in the chat or unmute.
What are the percentages between the female, the young men and young women that we see here in North Dallas?
So that percentage is relatively a little over 80-20. And again, that's just those that are reported. Everything's not reported. And so we don't even, and that data is from last year. We don't even have data from this year. And that's really only for our program. I'm not sure about nationwide what the statistics are. Just the people that are involved in what we do at Traffic 911.
What is the reach of Traffic 911 in the Metroplex?
So we do the whole North Texas. So we go as far as anything. We don't go as far as Houston, but we have. If, like, let's say a girl ran away or was trafficked and she came from Houston or Austin or wherever, we make sure we try to get the girls back to where they're from. But as far as our ongoing services are only here in Dallas and surrounding areas.
Oh, okay, so you don't do the rural areas like Quitman?
We do. We do.
All right.
And again,
And
it's based on where the girls come from and where we get calls from. Law officers, we have partnerships with every police department, and for those who utilize us, some people don't. Like some departments don't feel like it's necessary. They don't understand the impact of having a friendly face when the girl is, because they see it from an officer's perspective, right? And so, but because we have the grant with the FBI and Homeland Security, our reach is whomever gives us a call, we go into action.
What are you looking for at the DART stations or the Greyhounds for any signs of trafficking with young girls or young boys that are at these substations?
So what we do, we look, first of all, we try to identify those who look like they're lost. So what does a runaway look like? Somebody with a backpack, someone with a hoodie, someone that's looking down, not looking up, avoiding eye contact with individuals. And so normally, just because of how long I've been doing this work, if I see any unaccompanied minor, I watch them very closely to see who they're talking to, what they're talking about. Does it look like a safe conversation? I don't always intervene, but I just pay close attention. And I have also, hey, are you okay? You need anything? And then sometimes the person they're talking to will walk off, or I'll be like, hey, I ain't seen you in a while. And so when I can, you know how you can feel somebody's uncomfortable, right? So we're really looking for folks who don't, for people who don't look comfortable or look worried or look like I don't really know this person. Because again, they ran away from what situation we don't know. So the fact that somebody's being nice to them, they automatically go with it, right? Like, wait, you're being nice, okay? Because I'm not used to kindness.
Right.
We have a question. Do you have, we had a volunteer that said they would like to donate, and I put the Traffic 911 URL in there. Is that a place where they can go and donate?
Yes, that's where you can go and donate. That's where you can find out about our prayer breakfast. And that's also where you can become a volunteer as well. Back in the day, volunteers were used as individuals who actually did the rescues. Actually, like I actually had a caseload. But since we got the grant, volunteers are used to do other things. We're not that involved with the girls anymore like we used to. And so by using that link that's in the, thank you, in the chat, that'll get you exactly to where we are.
Okay. And another question was, do you have any booklet or flyer type information that that this group can hand out to like youth groups?
Yes, we actually do a whole nother different presentation for youth that's geared towards youth. So I can make sure you get those flyers, but also if you need somebody to talk to the youth directly, there's a video we show. We talk about internet safety. We talk about those people you're talking to on the screen are not your friends. We talk about not sending photos. So there is a youth component that we do as well.
Okay. And one more question. Have you ever encountered a mature fifth or sixth grader being trafficked?
So yes, I think one of our youngest was a third grader who's been trafficked by a member of the church. He was over the children's chorale, and this young girl was a third grader. She lived with her grandmother, who was 74 years old, and didn't have any help. So he volunteered to pick her up from school and make sure she get to choir practice. And he started to molest her. And then eventually he put her on the back page and started to make profit off of her. And she's a third grader, which was difficult because, and he got her on drugs as well. And there's not a lot of recovery or programs for minors, especially that young. And so, yes, unfortunately, we have encountered.
And I know that you all have lots of other questions. We're going to have to move on to our next speaker. Hold those questions because we're going to have a few minutes at the end that we'll be able to get back to the questions. So I want to turn it over now to Yolanda Jones. Thank you so much for the information that you have already shared. It's just invaluable information and things that we need to know and how we can help. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jordan, and I'm going to let you begin. And remember, if you have additional questions, continue to put them in the chat, and we will address as many as we can at the end.
Yeah, I'll just like to echo, Yolanda, thank you so much for sharing for the work that you do through Traffic 911 and that the whole organization is doing. This presentation has just been like incredibly eye-opening for me. So just thank you. And so, hi, everyone. It's nice to see some of you again. I'm going to be kind of sharing from the perspective of to that question that was asked. I didn't quite see who asked the question, but about what are the types of things to look out for when it comes to signs that someone may be experiencing human trafficking and sex trafficking in particular. And then just as an FYI, so I am a psychiatrist, so I end up often seeing people on the back end of this, of when they've gone through such an unimaginable experiences, working with them through the healing process. So being able to pinpoint, for instance, the example of someone who may be still living at home, still going to school, not necessarily the runaway example that Yolanda shared. I think being able to keep an eye out on not only the children, but women, boys, men that we're seeing in our communities who could be victims and then survivors. So I'm going to just share my screen real quick because you all know I like a nice PowerPoint. But just to kind of share, I'm going to go through a few different topics here where it's really just thinking about what is the mental health impact of human trafficking? What are some of the signs and symptoms of the most common ailments that come about, and then how do we as a church actually help people who are survivors of human trafficking, but specifically looking at that mental health perspective. The disclaimer I always have to give is that this is to inform, not to diagnose. So I'm always just here to kind of give you some information. But the information I wanted to start off with is some of the numbers. So these numbers match a bit of what Yolanda said. So this is kind of looking globally, that if you were to pick a bucket of 10 people who have been survivors of human trafficking, that 7 out of 10 will be female, where 5 are adult women, 2 are girls, and then the remaining 3 out of 10 are boys. So it's kind of it's the global numbers say 70% female, 30% male. And from a mental health perspective, the most common mental health conditions that come up are anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, substance abuse, and then even eating disorders. So these are some of the things that, the ways that human trafficking and then particularly sex trafficking can impact individuals. And then what's interesting, so if you dig down into the different types of trafficking, so today we've been focusing more so on sex trafficking. People who have been victims of sex trafficking have higher levels of fear compared to other kinds of violent trafficking. They tend to be more isolated from others. So whether that is in the example of someone who has run away from their home setting, or even within the context of a home setting, they may be even more isolated from the others within the home or within school or even within a place of work potentially. And then they also tend to have more mental health needs than those who are victims or survivors of other types of trafficking. So the overall signs, this is kind of just like the generic, easiest to remember red flags for possible mental illness, and specifically those symptoms that come up when someone has experienced trafficking, is you want to look for changes, which often requires you to have a relationship to begin with someone when you're looking for changes, but you don't always have to look for changes. So I start with, talking about what are some of the changes that we can be looking out for. We're looking for changes in thoughts. So that's concentration, understanding, memory, just emotions in general. Are there differences? Someone who's usually happy is now a little bit more sad or withdrawn. The pace of speech is another way to kind of identify potential mental illness. Someone's logic, just the way that they're thinking about the world, is another thing to consider. And then appearance, is there a change in weight, change in hygiene, change in the types of clothes that someone is wearing, the types of mannerisms that someone has. These are all the sorts of things that we look for changes in what may be someone's victimization baseline to then their post-traumatic experience and their changes in their overall composition as a human. And with that, kind of wanting to break this down. So I mentioned anxiety, depression, substance use, and addiction, and then post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm just going to walk through this really briefly, kind of going over high level some of the illnesses that may come up, but then I'm really going to focus in on the signs and symptoms that you can kind of keep an eye out for regarding human trafficking, but then honestly regarding just mental illness in general. So some of the things that come up. So Yolanda, for instance, mentioned the example of the young girl who experienced panic. Panic disorder is something that comes up somewhat regularly. Obsessive compulsive disorder is something else. Social anxiety disorder. So now even just fear of communicating and interacting with people in social settings. Agoraphobia is a fear of even just going outside. So people are more likely to want to stay indoors. They're afraid of being in open spaces or around a lot of people. Specific phobias are another example of anxiety, and then generalized anxiety, which is where people are really kind of anxious about just about everything, truthfully, that more or less things that typically wouldn't cause any kind of fear or stress response are then causing them excessive worry. And that can be in the context of having experienced human trafficking. So the signs and symptoms that you really want to be paying attention to. It's interesting because Yolanda was really focused on children, and in children, some of the signs and symptoms can be a lot more nuanced than with adults. So one of the big things that we pay attention to in anxiety with children is irritability. That's also pretty common in adults, but in children in particular, we're keeping an eye out for irritability, which is a way that anxiety in children tends to outwardly express. But then there are other examples of signs and symptoms that someone might have is maybe they're more restless, they're having more worried thoughts, they're very tired all the time, even though they may be sleeping well. They may not be sleeping well, they may be having sleep challenges, maybe even nightmares, and they may have muscle tension where they just are feeling tense and on edge all the time. Panic attacks in particular may show up with chest pain, chest tightness, palpitations, maybe even sweatiness or chronic nausea. So sometimes something as simple as someone who has had prolonged nausea, you may want to check to see, like, is this person having some sort of stomach issue? But oftentimes prolonged nausea is related to anxiety. And things like that are things that we want to make sure that we're just really paying attention. Like Yolanda mentioned, if you see someone that just things don't look right, it's kind of the same when we're thinking about mental illness and the health impact, that we're looking for things that just don't seem quite right. And then when we're thinking about trauma, so trauma and the related trauma response, it's really that emotional response to something terrible that has happened. So in this case, the trafficking itself is the traumatic event that can then lead to various types of illnesses. And acute stress disorder is a big one. So this tends to show up about 30 days or so, within 30 days of a traumatic experience happening. Adjustment disorders tend to pop up within 3 months, where the person is just changing. They're adjusting to this new experience in life that they're going through and the turmoil of it. So there's just adjustment related to the trauma. We often hear about post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is very specific, meaning that it's kind of similar, to be honest, to acute stress disorder, but it lasts longer. So this is when the symptoms go on for more than a month. Then we're thinking about post-traumatic stress disorder. Dissociation is a really big one too. That's where people start feeling disconnected from themselves. And oftentimes it's a way that the body starts to cope and to compensate for something that is this tragic happening, that our body almost like separates our psyche from our physical sense, and that dissociation can occur. And then there's also complex bereavement. And sometimes people feel like there's a loss of who they were before trauma, and even having this complex bereavement in that context is possible. So again, the highlight here, and you'll see that irritability pops up again as some of the other signs of trauma. We're thinking about the fact that we may see people experiencing low mood, maybe there's emotional reactivity. So something that you wouldn't typically set someone off or be a trigger is now a very large trigger. Maybe something as simple as if you were to miss a bus, maybe on one day previously you would not have been that upset about it, but now it feels like the end of the world, and you may have like a meltdown or something like that. That's what it means to have that increased emotional reactivity. The irritability that I mentioned before can also come up in trauma, anxiousness as well. So that nervous feeling, nightmares, flashbacks. So that's kind of feeling like if that horrible thing is happening again in real time. Being really aware of surroundings. So just being overly on guard all the time, seeing everything or everyone as unsafe, being really easily reactionary to things that are going on, difficulty functioning in the day-to-day, having negative thoughts about yourself or just like the world at large, out of the norm for that person, but then also kind of out of context for the situation. So out of these signs and symptoms here, kind of like with anxiety, if I go back to the anxiety slide, the things I would really want you to think about with anxiety, irritability. As I said before, that's going to be one that's a consistent theme. The worry, even then the physical manifestation of panic, those are some of the things to really be paying attention to. And then when we're thinking about recognizing signs of trauma, I think there's physically, before we even get to the emotional part, are you noticing any physical signs of trauma? Again, that can be something when we're going back to those general red flags of changes in weight, changes in the type of clothing someone is wearing. Are there bruises evident? And those are the sorts of outward signs that we can look for. But then when we think about the emotional signs, I really think the irritability, the anxiousness, the emotional reactivity tend to be some of the more easier to notice signs and symptoms if you're not specifically trained as a clinician. And the goal of this isn't for you to become trained as a clinician, but more so to help you really be able to pinpoint some of the things that are easier to spot just kind of in a day-to-day existence. So then depression is another category of what may come up as a result of a traumatic event from human trafficking. And the depression with sadness, dejection, despondency, really just feeling incredibly low, possibly to the point of wanting to end one's life, that might show up in the context of major depressive disorder, and persistent depressive disorder, which is basically like major depressive disorder that lasts for 2 years or more, with basically someone just being consistently depressed for that time period. And then even in the context here, so again, Yolanda mentioned this idea of when there are experiences of pregnancy in the context of human and sex trafficking, postpartum depression rates can be even higher in that context. So that's something for us to pay attention to as well. So again, the signs and symptoms here, I probably should have added it on, but typically these slides are more so for adults. But irritability, again, I'm saying it again because that like irritability easily kind of popping off at some minor issues, that comes up in children as well who are depressed. And that in and of itself can be a sign of depression, even without actual depressed mood in children. But if we're thinking about adults or maybe even slightly older children, thinking of like the adolescent teenage range, we're thinking about hopelessness, depressed mood, sleep changes, and that can be sleeping too little or sleeping too much. Appetite changes, again, that can be increased appetite or decreased appetite. A really big one, especially when we're thinking about the children population, it's the idea of loss of interest in activities. So we want to think about maybe the kid who usually loves going to soccer practice, or they're usually singing or hanging out with friends, but now they're not interested in doing any of these things. These are the sorts of things that we want to make sure we're paying attention to. And it starts off with relationship because we kind of have to know someone's baseline to be able to understand if things have changed for them. And then thinking about, are they able to function at school? Are they functioning in the home? If this person was working, whether it be a child or an adult, are they not able to complete those tasks anymore? With the depression, we also see changes in energy, difficulty concentrating, guilt comes up a lot. So sometimes there's this projection of feeling guilty about something that's not their fault. that it being a part of sex trafficking and being in that space, people can have a lot of guilt associated with that. And that in and of itself could be a reason folks don't come forward to share, one of the potential reasons. Like I mentioned before too, thoughts of suicide or harm or self-harm are very important for us to be paying attention to, of whether or not someone is making statements like, I'd rather not be here, or I wish I wouldn't wake up, or, you know, life isn't worth it. Those types of statements are things that we should really take seriously, especially as we know that within the Black community, suicide rates amongst children are escalating at exponential rates. So these are the types of things that we really have to be paying attention to. And then the last category that I'm going to cover, it's really thinking about addiction and substance use disorders. So again, I feel like this is just such a great follow-up to what Yolanda shared, because a lot of what she shared, I'm kind of just talking about it from the clinical perspective. But again, she gave the example of the third grader who was then introduced to substances. And that's a very common occurrence in human trafficking, where addiction develops, whether it is alcohol, amphetamines, benzos. I've listed out all the different types of substances here that are commonly used, whether it is in the context to help, and I'm going to put that in hard quotes, to force someone into being able to do these horrible acts that the traffickers are forcing them to do. Or sometimes even the victims will voluntarily use substances to numb themselves from the horrific nature of the work that they are being forced and exploited in. So addiction becomes very common in this population. So similarly, what are some of the signs and symptoms of things to pay attention to? Honestly, again, I probably should have put irritability on this slide, but I didn't. Irritability follows through in each of these categories. That can be a sign of symptom. And then problems, again, where you're not able to function the way people were functioning before, that loss of energy and motivation, neglecting one's appearance, spending a lot of money to get access to the substance, obsessing about the next time you'll get access to the substance, or even performing risky behaviors, whether while intoxicated or to get their next dose. Experiencing withdrawal symptoms, stealing or lying to get the drug. These are things that we can pay attention to in the context of human trafficking. But as I said before, a lot of this is also relevant just in general as well. So thinking about just even communicating concerns, we have this idea, this is a chart that I took from the APA's quick reference for mental health for faith leaders. And what I want us to really focus on is this top component in the gray, the gray color, where if someone's experiencing loss of hope, or you're seeing someone who appears sad or desperate, one of the things there, and I kind of wish actually they had this switched, is the first thing is to make sure that you establish some sort of personal connection. And if that's like someone you see for instance, at the bus station, of just saying like, hi, my name is da da da. This is like, I wanted to check to see if you're okay. Something as simple as that. Then kind of talking about what are the options for hope going forward, or steps of what you can do to help. If someone's feeling anxious, being able to use yourself, stay calm, and to help to reassure them. And again, to be able to seek to understand what's going on, so that you can then possibly refer someone to resources that exist. So now we all know about Traffic 911 as a really great resource that I probably going to add into my slide deck. But then kind of thinking about, if people are having trouble caring for themselves or difficulty making decisions, that's where we're thinking about outpatient care. But in crises situations where people can't care for themselves at all, they're in distress of any kind, where there's a threat to their own safety or to someone else's safety, that's where we're really thinking about a crisis mode response, with either calling 911, 988, or taking someone to an emergency department or psychiatric emergency evaluation center. And I probably will not go into too much detail on this how to make a referral part, because I'll probably leave this truthfully to Yolanda to talk a little bit more, even about what it would be like to make a referral to Traffic 911. But from mental health and mental illness in general, these are kind of some of the tips that I recommend churches use when they want to just make referrals in general. It's identifying a mental health professional, and that starts off by having a list of local resources, of which I hope you all are going to add Traffic 911 to your list of local resources for mental illness, and then communicating clearly with that person about why you're making the referral. And then here, this is just kind of like in general, because this is thinking less so from the acute, like you've just discovered someone has had an experience with trafficking, but more so to that long-term recovery process. Here I list out some examples of places where mental health services can be found. My nonprofit, we have a list of resources that we provide through ChristianMentalHealthInitiative.org. Psychology Today is a really great resource. Therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. The Black Psychiatrist of America actually has a guide of Black psychiatrists around the country who provide psychiatric care. And then I've listed out Talkspace and Brightside as some other options as well. So that kind of wraps things up on my end. I just wanted to share some general resources. And as I said, I'll probably end up adding Traffic 911 onto here. But the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration is always a great resource that has just really thorough mental health information in general. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is now 988, is a great resource. The National Alliance on Mental Illness as well. I find that to be an incredible resource, not only for online information, but then for actually like meeting up in groups. So whether it's for people who are experiencing challenges or for family members who are experiencing challenges, they have really just great, phenomenal, locally based resources. I already mentioned Psychology Today and BetterHelp, and I will wrap us up there because I know we're running low on time for questions, but I'll wrap up there. And I hope that this was helpful, and I'm looking forward to kind of just sharing more and answering any other questions going forward.
So now it is Q&A time. So any questions you have, you can put them in the chat, or you may unmute yourself and ask your question. Tara, we may can go back to some of those that were asked earlier that we didn't get to.
I saw one, Stephanie Smith just dropped one in the chat. But yeah, there was someone texted like a long one. I think Jeanette Davis had a question before that got skipped. I can answer Stephanie's. So the question Stephanie has is how exactly does dissociative disorder look like on someone compared to someone who is a loner or an introvert? So that's a really great question. So I would just briefly state that there are quite different, because dissociative disorder comes more so from the person's internal feeling of being separated from the world, more so than an actual physical being separated from the world. So for instance, someone who's experiencing dissociation may feel like they are floating outside of their body, for instance, or like, let's say they take a shower, they feel like the water isn't hitting their skin, it's hitting someone else's skin. So it's their own internal disconnect from their day-to-day lived experience.
Okay. What are some services provided to help the victims get back help the victims get back out into society, to try to get back into normality?
So for us, because we work with kids, it's normally getting them back into school, and a lot of our work is centered around mental health, making sure they have the treatment plan and therapy that they need. All of our staff and our survivors, or as we like to call them, are involved in mental health. And like I said, with the family. So for those who want to go back to school or get a GED, and go back to regular high school, we provide all of those assistance. Or those who want to get their first apartment, we find resources to do that as well. So, and that's what I meant by long haul love. We stay with them. There's no age out of the program. You continue to be in this program for the long.
That's great. And I see the next question. Kimberly asks, what are some tips for convincing someone to get help? because they have to want to get help. And I'll answer from the mental health perspective, and then Yolanda, maybe you can answer from the specific trafficking experience as well. But from a mental health perspective, I always encourage folks to start off with conversations, not starting off telling someone that they need help, but understanding what's going on. Understanding what they feel like the challenges are, and finding ways to offer options. So for instance, so I do mental health first aid instructions, and part of mental health first aid, the 2 E's in the ALGE model. E is to encourage self-help, where like, what are things that person can be doing to help their own mental well-being, whether that be like coping skills, going like self-care, things like that. And then it's also to encourage professional help when needed. So you just even like dropping in seeds of like, these are options. You can't, as you said, you can't force anyone to use the services, but letting them know what exists and then following up. I really like that long haul reference that Yolanda mentions, that you're going to keep checking in on them and keep reminding them of the options that exist. And hopefully they will be able to take advantage before it's at a point of crisis.
I agree with everything you just said.
Stephanie followed up, how can we tell if someone, I'm guessing that's how can we see that, guessing that it's how can you tell if someone's having a dissociative experience? Truthfully, yeah, you kind of have, for the most part, the person has to explain it to you. But at the same time, like, this goes back to that relationship building. So if you know someone, for instance, and like, you know how they usually interact with you can tell that something is off. Like, you might not be able to label it as dissociation because you haven't been trained in how to do that, but you can tell like, hey, like, I feel like you're not connecting with me, or I'm not connecting with you the way that we usually would connect. Tell me what's going on. Something along those lines is how you would get to it, more so than like looking specifically for signs and symptoms of dissociation.
And I'm going to go back to the tips for convincing someone. It's really, you just need to listen. We always like to give advice. Well, what I would do, I didn't ask you that, and that's why I don't tell you everything, right? So just listen to what I'm saying. And so by you listening, it also opens that opportunity for not to be judged. Because most people don't share because they don't want to be judged. Because they themselves feel guilty. They feel like they're at fault. Like, how could I be crazy enough to let this person convince me to do this? So why would I share that with somebody when I'm feeling that bad about myself? So I think when you say convince someone to get help, it's the listening and walking that walk with them. And because this is a church, I love the Lord too. He heard my cry. But you pray for him in your prayer closet and you listen, right? Like, don't overdo the scriptures. You keep the scriptures for yourself, so you can continue on this journey with that person. And then by them seeing your light, then they can go forward. But you don't have to do your whole Easter speech to convince somebody to get some help, right? Just listen, long haul love, be patient, be kind. Don't give your opinion because you don't know what you would do in that situation, right? So I think listening also is just a big part of, and not being so judgmental when you listen.
Faith, did you have your hand up?
I did. Miss Yolanda, on social media, I see a lot of videos where young kids who have been kidnapped, maybe they don't go into detail if they are entering sex trafficking or what have you not, but the young kids give a hand gesture that shows the people in the mall or wherever the setting was that they are in danger. They are with an adult that is harming them. Is this a true thing? If so, can you talk about those signs? And if it's not, what can we teach our children or nieces and nephews, signs that they can display if they are taken, or if they want to yell help, but they're scared to? What can they do?
So yes, some of that is truthful, but it's also regional. So what they do in Oklahoma may not be the same thing they do in Dallas. What they do in Dallas may be different from what they do in Fort Worth. And because there's no general universal sign for help, that's the hard part about it. So one place, for example, which I forgot to mention, is QT gas stations. They have what's called the safe space.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
their staff have been trained to, if you come in and say, hey, I need help, they put you in the back, they hide you from whomever you're running from. It's also on DART buses. So DART is supposed to be able to, they are trained to shelter you when you say you need help. So that's one of the universal things, especially here in Dallas, you can tell kids, look for that little house, and it says safe place. That's helpful. But also the other downfall about social media is we've also had cases where kids had done that and not in danger, just thought it was fun to see if it really worked, right?
Gotcha. Yes, ma'am.
And so we also try to teach our kids to, like for my property, on my property, we have a program where we have a sign that's just unique for us as an organization. So I think if your church or your groups that you're in come up with their own safety sign that your community is trained in, that'll also be beneficial, because the other part of that, if you've seen it on social media, the people doing the kidnapping saw it too. Right. So they can easily stop you from doing it. And so that's why we normally just ask adults to be a little bit more vigilant when they're paying attention to seeing things that look a little odd or off-putting.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, I am overwhelmed with information right now. This has been absolutely awesome in a good way, overwhelmed in a good way. Thank you. I know we're at the hour, and so thank you, Yolanda. Thank you, Atasha. Thank you both for the information that you have provided, and we just appreciate it. So can you all show them some love and some reactions, please? Absolutely.
Thanks for
Thank
having us.
you.
This was great.
Thank you all for being here. And in your chat, you have some information. You have Yolanda's email. If you want to reach out to her, and then some thank yous and kudos coming in. Dr. Jordan's is in there also. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to submit them or let us know, and we can try and get an answer for you. Again, I want to thank our presenters for an awesome session tonight on human trafficking and what we can do and all of its implications and how we can help, because it is a real thing and we want to be part of the solution. So I'm going to